Okay, we're going to complete this absolute value foldable so that we can get some notes taken for ourselves. So whenever we solve an absolute value equation, we always want just an absolute value expression by itself on one side of the equal sign, and the other side of the equal sign has some value associated with it, a positive value. In some cases, we will have a negative value, and we'll see some examples of those. So right now we have the absolute value of x minus 5 equals 9. And if you recall, if we had the absolute value of negative 1, that equals positive 1. The absolute value of positive 1 also equals 1. So the negative value of the inside of the absolute value, or the positive value of the inside of the absolute value, always gives you a positive answer. So in this case, for this particular equation, we have x, the absolute value of x minus 5 equals 9. So we can write two separate equations out for that. We can say that x minus 5, so that's the inside value, that can equal negative, just like up here, it can equal a negative value of the evaluated value. So x minus 5 equals negative 9. But we can also say, because of the positive value, that x minus 5 equals positive 9. And now we just solve each of those two problems. So let's do that right here. All right, I'm going to solve the x minus 5 equals negative 9 equation first, because that'll give me the lower value that x can equal. So this is just like solving any other equation, trying to find x. So I add 5 to both sides. I'm just trying to isolate x, and I have x equals negative 4. Down below, I'm going to do the x minus 5 equals positive 9. So again, I'm just going to add 5 to get x by itself. And so I end up with x equals 14. So the final answer to this is x equals negative 4, comma 14. Okay, so now we're going to check our work. So we said that x equals negative 4 or 14, and so we'll just substitute each one of those values into x and make sure that it actually comes out to be positive 9. So you have the x absolute value of negative 4 minus 5 equals 9. So we're taking this value first, and we do indeed have negative 9, absolute value of negative 9 equals 9, and yes, 9 does equal 9. Okay, so we've got that one, we've confirmed that. So now the other one is 14 minus 5 equals 9, and when we do this math in here, we end up with the absolute value of 9 equals 9, and so again we have 9 equals 9. So yes, we've done the work correctly. Going on to the next portion of the foldable, we don't have just an absolute value on the left side. We have this extra indicator of a negative 5 equals a number. Okay, so we can't solve, we can't do what we just did until we get rid of this extra term. So in order to get rid of that extra term, we just have to add 5 to both sides. So we're going to do that, and when we get that new equation, we have the absolute value of x plus 4 equals 13. All right, so now we can do exactly what we did before, and we'll write two equations. Okay, so we have x plus 4 equals negative 13 and x plus 4 equals positive 13. We're simply going to solve those. To get the x by itself, we have to get rid of this 4, so we're going to subtract 4 on both sides. We end up with x equals negative 17. We do the same thing to the other equation because we're trying to isolate x. We subtract the 4 on both sides. We get x equals 9. So we have two answers, x equals negative 17 and x equals 9, and we just need to check our work. Okay, so we have our original equation, and we're going to substitute each of these values. So we have negative 17 plus 4 minus 5 equals 8. So negative 17 plus 4 gives us a negative 13 minus absolute value of negative 13 minus 5 equals 8. And so that gives us 13, because the absolute value of negative 13 is 13, minus 5 equals 8. And so yes, indeed, 8 equals 8. So that value is good. So we're just going to do the same thing with the other value. So we have 9 plus 4, absolute value of 9 plus 4 minus 5 equals 8. 9 plus 4 is 13, so the absolute value of 13 minus 5 equals 8. The absolute value of a positive 13 is still a positive 13, minus 5 equals 8. And again, we have 8 equals 8, and so we have confirmed that that also is a correct answer. Okay, so here's the hardest one on this whole foldable, but it's really not difficult. We just have to take things one step at a time. So remember, we need just an absolute value expression on one side of the equal sign, so we've got to get rid of all that extra stuff. So the first thing we want to get rid of is that positive 3, and we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. Okay, so we end up with 2 times the absolute value of 2x minus 8 equals 20. But now we also have this extra 2. Well, it's being multiplied by this absolute value, so to get rid of multiplication, we're just going to divide. So we're going to divide the whole thing by 2, which means this side has to get divided by 2. So now that gives us a final equation that we can work with. The absolute value of 2x minus 8 equals 10. And so now we can take that, because it's in the form that we want, and write our two different equations. Okay, so we're going to solve 2x minus 8 equals negative 10, and then we're going to solve 2x minus 8 equals positive 10 for the same reasons as we've been doing before. So the first thing we're going to do is add 8, because we're trying to get x by itself. We're trying to isolate x. So we end up with 2x equals negative 2. We'll divide by 2 on each side, and so we'll have x equals negative 1. So that's our first answer. Down below in the second equation, we're also going to add 8 down here because we're trying to get rid of that negative 8. So when we add 8 down there, we end up with 2x equals 18. And again, we'll divide by 2 to isolate that x, and so we'll have x equals 9. So the last thing we have to do is just check our work. Okay, so our first value of x is negative 1, so we're going to substitute that in. So we have 2 times this absolute value of 2 times negative 1 minus 8 plus 3 equals 23. Here comes our PEMDAS. So we want to evaluate this first. So 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, and we have negative 2 minus 8, which is going to give us the absolute value of negative 10, and the absolute value of negative 10 is positive 10, and we're going to multiply that by 2 because we had that 2 up there, and we can't forget about the plus 3 equals 23. So we have 2 times 10 is 20 plus 3 equals 23, and sure enough, 23 equals 23. So the first answer is correct. So now we just have to solve for the second answer, or check the second answer. Okay, so we're going to substitute in for x the 9. So we'll just substitute that in, write all this stuff out, and then we'll evaluate. Again, we'll do this side first, this part first, because it's inside the absolute value. So we have 18, 2 times 9 is 18, minus 8 is the absolute value of 10, times 2 plus 3 equals 23. Okay, absolute value of 10 is 10, so we have 2 times 10 plus 3 equals 23, and again, we get to see that 23 equals 23, and so the second answer is also correct. Okay, you probably noticed that on that middle section they had another problem down there at the bottom that says try. That's for you to do on your own, and you can stop this video, do it on your own, and then come back and you can see the work. Okay, so I did the workout here so that you can see it, and the answers come out to be x equals negative 8 or 12. And I did not go through the verifying process, but you certainly can do that to make sure that these answers are correct.